Canadian scholar dedicated to the study of Indian residential school history calls for an investigation of death and abuses in the Indian residential school system, saying much more resources and support are needed. First Nation in the Canadian province of British Columbia made public that 17 suspected unmarked burials were discovered on the former Port Alberni Indian residential school site on Vancouver Island, and 67 children died in that school were identified through research of archives. According to Dr. Tricia Logan, the interim academic director at the Indian Residential School History Dialogue Center at the University of British Columbia, the findings show that there is still a tremendous amount of work to be done to uncover the dark pages of Indian residential schools in Canadian history.
Port Alberni, like a lot of schools, had students coming from across British Columbia and from other provinces, I think. Over 100 different communities had their children sent to Port Alberni. So the reach and the number of survivors and intergenerational survivors involved is huge. It's very far-reaching. There's a great deal of urgency because it's to align with the investigations and the work that each individual community is doing, to do with ground-penetrating radar research, to do with archaeological research and community and survivor-led research, that level of urgency to match the records with each one of those different sites and investigations.
The scholar stressed that it is important to understand that for over 100 years and until even now, Native residents face systematic oppression and discrimination. Indian residential school is just a part of that colonial system.
Even before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but definitely during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was trying to look at residential schools and the history of residential schools in a much broader scope for all of Canada, and how colonialism and how structures of colonialism like residential schools, the child welfare system, Indian hospitals, day schools, how structures that involve missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, how all of that is inherently connected to residential schools, and how the effects and the ongoing impacts of colonialism carry on today.
For more than a century since the 1830s, school-aged children of the Indigenous community were snatched from their mothers' arms and corralled in distant residential schools funded by the Canadian government, where they were surveilled by the clergy of the Christian Church, barred from family visits, and institutionalized away from their cultural traditions. About 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children are believed to have fallen victim to the cultural assimilation.